Welcome to the Swisspreneur Show, a podcast about startup stories and hands-on learnings from experienced entrepreneurs. My name is Sylvan and I will be your host. Today we're taking a train to Staffa by the beautiful lake of Zurich. There we'll be visiting Tommy Brandle, founder and CEO at Run My Accounts. The company offers services for Swiss SMEs and startups, supporting them in several areas, from online accounting to annual financial statements to much more. Having arrived in Staffa, we're just a short walk away from the industrial quarter and the headquarters of Run My Accounts. From the outside, the office looks more like an e-commerce company that needs a large warehouse and lots of space. But as soon as we ring the bell on the first floor, we find a modern space with bright rooms and a really cool and dynamic office. We go straight to a meeting room and start by asking our very first question. Thomas, a very warm welcome to the Swisspreneur Show. It's great to have you here today.
Thanks a lot.
We are here in Staffa at your beautiful offices. You moved here 5 years ago and more than 50 people work here nowadays. What does this place mean to you beyond your daily place of working?
Yeah, it's where the company is. That's where a lot of my life happens. A lot of fun, a lot of successes, but also sometimes difficult times that happen as an entrepreneur. Yeah, so there's a lot going on here.
A lot of emotional stories to tell, absolutely. I can imagine. You basically started Run My Accounts out of a problem that you identified. You've been working in startups as CFO, but also at the big company at IBM. Yeah. Can you walk us a bit through the early days of Run My Accounts? How did you discover the problem? What was the problem that you had identified?
Yeah, so the problem, I identified it quite a long time ago. After my studies, I've worked as a CFO in a company, in a startup called Minic that I co-founded with some friends from secondary school. And I was the CFO there, and that meant, especially in the early stage of the company, that I did a lot of bookkeeping and accounting, and it was quite annoying. And as the company expanded, there was more and more work that I had to do, and it was difficult at that time to find personnel. So I had a lot to do myself of it, and sometimes also during the nights, because at some point we were about 120 employees and it was really a lot of work. Yeah. And at that time it was difficult to find another solution, because an outsourcing to a fiduciary was not really an option, because then you didn't get actual numbers. As well, there was no online systems at that time. It was in about 2000, year 2000. So I had to do it myself with my own stuff, but it was difficult to find people at that time that were qualified enough to do the accounting work. And later on, as we sold the company, I went to work at IBM. And I was a negotiator there. I negotiated outsourcing contracts. And in that job, I also negotiated business transformation outsourcing contracts. One was with a large Swiss insurance company, where they outsourced the whole accounts payable department to IBM. And there I saw how IBM works with accounting. So they automated a lot. They had SAP with a lot of automation, and what they could not automate, they were able to process very efficiently. And I thought, why not do something like that for SMEs, because they have a lot more leverage than a large insurance company, I thought at that time. But it was difficult to get there, so I thought a lot about the processes that could be set up, which also fit for small enterprises. In small enterprise, you have the problem that it's very diverse. So, for example, if you have a restaurant or a marketing agency, they have totally different accounting needs. And if you want to automate, you need to find a central core because you need to standardize if you want to automate. Right. And then it's much easier if you have a good standard, but you need to find or you need to reflect also the differences between all these companies. And that was the huge difference in contrary to the large company. And I found ways how to handle that within times, but it took a long time until I then finally said, okay, I found the company.
What was that decisive step that you took there? Was there a moment where you said you won your first clients, or what was the sort of the supporting moment that led you to that decision saying, hey, now I take the jump and found my own company?
I think it was the entrepreneurial mindset that I have deep in me, because also my father has been an entrepreneur, my grandfather as well. So I think that's something in me that is very entrepreneurial. And in a large corporate organization, it was difficult for me sometimes to handle that. Mm-hmm. And therefore, at some point I thought I have to found my own company again. And before with Minik, we were very successful. It was also very, very entrepreneurial. And I thought I have to go back to the entrepreneurial side and live that. Mm-hmm. And also, as I told some friends about my idea, I was lucky to have 3 customers from scratch. So from the beginning on, they said it's a good idea if you do that. So we will be customers. Mm-hmm. And then it was quite easy to start with these 3 customers.
So that's basically also how you then put the idea into practice, because having an idea or a challenge, a problem that you identify yourself by seeing both worlds, the startup world and the corporate world, is one thing. Yeah. But then actually also, executing it and putting it into practice is a completely different thing. Can you also talk about how you then actually built the company and the product and delivered a service to the first 3 customers?
This was quite tricky, and it was like a prototype that I did. So a lot of things that I intended to do, I did not have at that time. I had almost no technology, right. And I had to develop the technology. I did that myself. I have coded a lot at this time. And it was like a prototype that I tested with these real customers. Mm-hmm. And a lot of it did not work at all, and a lot of it worked. And then I had to find out which parts work and which didn't work. Mm-hmm. It's like the lean approach. It was not that common at the time, but it was absolutely how I did it.
There was no fancy saying for the business practice that you had, but it was similar to the lean approach.
Yeah. And it was like the prototype that I did. And after I had this worked for 3 customers, they recommended some other customers. Mm-hmm. And then at some point I had 6 customers, and then I had again to find out how I could serve these customers and work with them, and also develop new technology. And after this was fine, I could find the next customers, and it worked like that. Right. Until I had really too much work to serve all these customers, and I needed to employ the first employee.
But I guess that's also a good philosophy. So you don't hire people just because you can. You hire people when it actually hurts and there's a real pain, because they just also have 24 hours, right?
Yeah, that's true. So I always had this organic approach within Run My Accounts, because I thought with the last company, with Minik, we had also venture capital, and was sometimes you also do decisions that are not maybe the best ones. If you have a lot of money and you need to spend it, you will spend it sometimes without thinking too much, and without having really the focus on how you spend it, and how what you do with that money exactly, and control everything. So I wanted to have another approach here in Run My Accounts. I think it's also because of the business. I think accounting business, you cannot, you have to have a good quality. That's the main issue here. You cannot just say I hire 10 people and I let them work with the customers, and then it does something fails. That's really that would cause a lot of damage. So you have to go to for 100% or almost 100%, and therefore, yeah, it's also difficult, I think, to grow in that field where we are.
So you grew organically, you won your first clients, then they referred you to other clients. I'm sure along this way of building up the company, there has also been difficult times or big challenges.
Absolutely, yeah.
Can you maybe name us a few that really kept you up at night and kept you very busy?
Well, there are a lot of these stories, but I think, there are different aspects. For example, I mean, the financial part was sometimes really hard because if you start with 3 customers, you don't make a lot of money, and there was a lot of investment on my side into the company because I just couldn't afford my salary. And then as soon as I had about 20 customers, I got a salary, a little salary out of it. And then I had to hire the first employee, and then I lost my salary again. So, and this went on and on and on. At some point, I really only had 500 Swiss francs on my bank account.
And you had 2 kids at home, right?
2 kids at home, yeah.
Crazy.
It was crazy, and you always need to think: am I really on the right way? Should I stop now because I could stop now, or should I go on? And it's not always just black and white. It's most of the times it's like gray, and you have to find your way with your intuition and your feelings, and that sometimes was really hard.
But I mean, having 500 Swiss francs on your private bank account with family at home, that's an immense pressure that you face there.
Absolutely.
What made you so confident to still push forward and keep following the track that you now successfully executed? What gave you this confidence to still continue on that path?
I had my customers, and they were happy with the service, and I thought there potentially will be more customers that I can make happy, and so that gave me the confidence. And also I'm quite a disciplined guy. I can really work hard and long, and that made me confident that I can do it on my own, as long as you have a success with the customers. I think that's the most important thing.
So basically the customer feedbacks and the referrals, they kept you going, and basically also supported you on this way. No, because other startups, they have investors. You on purpose didn't choose to have any big investors.
At least at the beginning, I had at about 2.5 years, I had some friends and family that invested, also some customers that were happy that they said they would invest. But it's not like a story like others do it with a lot of venture capital and different rounds. So it worked a little bit differently, but also very well, I think.
So beyond the customers, they were also supported from friends and family. Maybe you can also talk a bit about that, how you convinced your friends and family to also walk down that path with you and support you on that project when some might have thought, oh, this is not working out.
On one side, there were customers that were happy, that told me they would be interested to invest into the company once there would be an opportunity. As I asked them, they also brought some friends, and I had some friends also from the companies that I worked before that invested a little bit of money, and it worked quite well. So at the end, I had even more investors than I wanted to have, and I could pick and choose. and find the right people that were supportive, that wanted also to engage for our mission. And this was quite well. So we have a very good relationship still with all the shareholders, and they're very supportive for the company.
Great. And then as you grew the company, I can imagine that also attracts other companies doing something similar to what you were offering. I think there were also competitors entering the market at a certain point in time.
Yeah, but I actually thought this would go much faster.
Okay.
I thought if I found the company maybe a year after I have the first competitors. It's also digitization in the field of accounting was for a very long time, it was absolutely no subject because fiduciaries were or seemed not to be interested in digitization. They liked to work with paper. Still, a lot of fiduciaries like to work with paper, I think. And it really took a very long time. I was quite surprised until I had the first competitors. And at the beginning, most of the competitors, they were maybe on the market for a year or so, and then they again disappeared. Because I think it's quite complex to do something like we do, and it needs some time probably. Or if you don't have too much money, if you really have a lot of money, some millions, you might be able to to go into this market and compensate for the experience that we have. You need a lot of money to get into competition with us, because we now have 10 years of experience in that field, and we know how the process works. We know which technology works, and I think you need a lot of money to survive in this field, because also in our in the accounting market, it's very sticky. So because people or companies just don't change their accounting system from one day to another, because they have their own processes. They have people that are educated with the software, and you have also maybe invested a lot of money in a software, and you won't just change it. So that's a software perspective, and also people trust is very important. So if you have a fiduciary that you have a good cooperation, you would not change him. So I think it's difficult to really grow very, very fast.
I think this is also a very Swiss-specific mentality, because here it's really based on a lot of trust. You know the people personally, and then even if they might be more expensive or not the best, you usually stick to them because you have this personal relationship, right? So that's right. This is hard to crack in that sort.
Totally, yeah.
Nowadays, you are a very successful company. You employ more than 50 people. You have offices in Switzerland here, in Staffa, where we're currently sitting, but also in Germany, where you employ 8 other people. And I want to sort of summarize your learnings from these past 10 years. You've gone through a lot, and you tested the prototyped, but you also mentioned other parts that are super important that we have not talked about yet. For example, the team. So what is your learning regarding the team that you set up, that you also learned along these 10 years?
I think the team is absolutely most important. You need to do such a mission with the right people. Otherwise, I think I would have totally failed. You need to have people that are really enthusiastic about the idea to maybe change the world a little bit, to push, in our case, to push digitization in the field of accounting with a mission, and also if you have success together, that helps a lot. And you need to find the right people in the right phase. So I think now, as you're more than 10 years old, we've gone through different phases. At the beginning, you need totally different people than maybe now. And we've also experienced that after some time, people that were joining just after the founding phase They had not that big fun anymore as the company grew, and you need to have processes and things installed that a bigger company just needs. And you have pioneers on the other side, and then maybe later it changes to people also that just are looking for a job, and that's also fine. I think at some point you need to go, you need to change your mindset.
That's probably also the transition that you have to manage in order to be able to grow at all, right?
Yeah.
And also one thing I think that is a good summary of your story, despite your love for entrepreneurship, you also sort of have the philosophy that building a company is really hard and difficult. I mean, we've heard it, you had tough times where also financially, but you went through them and built a success. Can you maybe a bit elaborate on why building a company is so hard, but why you should actually do it anyway?
Yeah. Yeah, I think there are several aspects. I mean, if you just start, you just basically have nothing. Your competitors, they have maybe they have customers, they have a product, they have an established network, they have a brand, they have a logo, they have a working IT network, they have a printer installed that just works. They just have anything that needs to run smoothly. But you as a startup, the first day when you start, you have nothing there. You just start from scratch. You need to think about, how do I print my letters? And then if you say, okay, now I have a printer, I don't have no logo, then you have to think about, what logo should I choose, or where do I get it? And then once you have the logo, you need to design your letter. And all this is just a huge amount of work and comes extra. And also, I think one problem by founding a company is that usually you have a plan. You think, I'll be there in about maybe 3 months from now, and there in half a year, and in a year I do that. And usually this plan is just way too enthusiastic. So usually you have always twice as long as you would expect. So especially in my case, it was always the case. So I always had twice as long, and it cost twice as lot a lot. But I knew that, and by knowing that, I could do a feasible plan. But yeah, I think it's very intense if you need to do that all together. But it's also a chance, because maybe the established companies, your competitors, they might have structures that they just cannot overthrow, and sometimes these structures are also not good enough anymore, because technology changed, and you have maybe an old technology that you use, and that's also the advantage of the startup, that you can build something from scratch and decide for the best, newest technologies, and also to disrupt. I think disruption is very hard in established companies with established personnel and
you experienced that at IBM, I can imagine.
Yeah, I don't want to talk about this, but it's difficult. I think I have to tell you. I mean, also in Run My Accounts, it's sometimes very difficult to change now, because people, people don't want to change everything any day. I have had to experience that as well.
I guess that's also part of the human nature. It's just to a certain degree how we're built, I guess.
Yeah. And I think I'm more the guy that wants to change anything, anytime. And there are but a lot of people that don't like that.
Right. But then, if you grow a company and then it gets harder and harder to actually do these changes. I mean, you've built a very successful, nice company. But then at a certain point in time, if you are that type of guy that likes to change things and so on, is there also the thought crossing your mind that, hey, this is now working, maybe I should start a new company or do something differently, because you like this probably very early stage where you can really change things on a daily basis almost.
Yeah, you're right. I mean, that's really an issue. So, but I think as long as you're successful and the mission works and you feel that you still are able um, to do a good job, I think it's good to also adopt, because my job changed a lot. At the beginning, I did just everything, and now I'm just doing a tiny thing or tiny process that didn't even exist at the beginning. And yeah, my job changed really a lot, and I think that's also something. Some entrepreneurs or some startup founders might not feel comfortable anymore with this job at some point, and then have to change. Either they leave the company, or they find another position in the company. Yeah, but for me at the moment it's still okay.
Great to hear that. So I would also like to talk about the financial tasks to get done from a startup's perspective. Probably it's best to start at the beginning when you actually start or set up your company. What are the financial tasks that a startup should consider to get done at that early stage?
Yeah, I think very important is that you should go for VAT as early as possible, because at the beginning you have a lot of investments. For example, if you buy a computer, or if you buy your desk and so on, and in Switzerland you always pay 7.7% VAT, and if you're not subject to VAT, you cannot get this VAT back. So especially in the beginning, when you're in the investment phase, if you're subject already to VAT, you can deduct these 7.7%, and that can be quite substantial amount. So don't wait for revenues to grow over 100,000 Swiss francs. Go for VAT as early as possible.
Otherwise, you leave money on the table.
Absolutely. Yeah, you can really save money by doing that.
What else is important in the early days that you should already have on the radar?
I think also it's important to think about when you do your first year-end closing, because for example in the Canton of Zurich you can say that you want to have a period of 23 months. There are other cantons that allow longer periods as well. And if you wait for a longer time, then you save also money with your fiduciary, because maybe if it really takes 23 months until you have to close the first time, you save just the first closing.
Right.
Nobody needs to do it, and like this.
How much money is that approximately? I mean, it really depends on the business and the size, but approximately.
I think it starts at maybe 1,000 Swiss francs, but depending on complexity and also how you handle your accounting during the year, it can be quite substantial amount of money that you could save potentially. And the later you do it, the later you have to pay it.
Right, makes sense. Yeah. And then also a very important part that you should think about probably from day one onwards is how do you structure your accounting, right?
Yeah.
What is your recommendation there for an early stage startup?
I think accounting is really important, not only in terms to fulfill the government requests. It's also a tool for you as a startup entrepreneur to get information how your company actually works. And sometimes I'm really a bit astonished, because you see all these guys walking around with wearables, with the Apple Watch and so on, that measures your pulse, your just anything, how many steps you did in a day, but they don't really care about their financials in the company. So I think it would be very beneficial to measure while you are growing, and to get the financial track that everything is okay, or that you can find something is not going well, you spend more money, or your revenues are not as expected. And I think it's really important to know where you are with your financials. And I recommend to any startup to set this up as early as possible. And if you're not able, or if you don't have any know-how, go to a fiduciary as early as possible.
I think that's a very beautiful comparison about the personal tracking and the company tracking.
Yeah.
Why do you think that many people don't pay attention on the company, the financial tracking?
I think there are several reasons. Maybe one aspect is I see a lot of people that are thinking accounting is just really adding some numbers, and that's basically it. So you add your telco fees and your hosting fees and so on, and then you get the number, and that's it. So quite easy, but after all, it's much more complex, and if you look for what happens in the VAT field, the social security field, there's a lot of things that you need to know, and it usually also accounting takes usually twice as long as you expect if you do it yourselves, and you have to find the differences. So if your bank account balance is wrong, you need to look for it quite maybe long until you find the error.
Right.
So and that's also not something that's really funny to do. So if I do a presentation, I always ask people who in this room likes accounting. And usually, if you have a speech in front of 100 people, one raises his hand.
So 1% likes it.
Yeah. And usually that's an accountant. So, so
Slightly biased.
That's true. And so I think people don't really like to do administration, and I think that's also, it's not entrepreneurial, because entrepreneurs want to talk to customers, they want to invent, but accounting has nothing to do with invention usually, and you just need to do it, and it's administration, so it's not fun to do it. It takes you a long time. It's just mathematics like in school, so it's maybe not that the fun, there's no fun factor in that.
But it's also a bit like brushing the teeth. Actually, in the end of the day, we all have to do it, at least from a company perspective.
Yeah.
So I can imagine there are different ways that you can set this up. You can either do all yourself, you can outsource everything and not do anything yourself.
Yeah.
And there are also scenarios or setups in between of these two extremes.
Yeah.
What are the best setups for startup companies? What would your recommendation be on that part?
I mean, on one side, you have the cost. If you think about hiring a fiduciary and you don't have the money to pay him, it's going to be difficult. But what I recommend, and I have to admit I'm a bit biased here, but if you don't have no knowledge, don't do accounting. I think as I said, when you're starting a company, you have to do so much. You have to until you have your competitors, and they all have this already. So my recommendation is to focus on the business, and because each day you're wasting on something that is not core. You lose money, not just money that you spend. It's also money in terms of opportunity costs. You don't earn a salary, and that's the really important and an expensive thing, not to have a monthly salary. You really should focus that you're able to pay you a salary from revenues as soon as possible. And I recommend not to focus on administration tasks. So I think it's beneficial to outsource. But I mean, if you really have know-how and you know exactly what needs to be done and how you do it, then it's perfectly fine if you do accounting yourselves.
You're probably also much faster that way, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It might be. It might be at least at the beginning when the volume is low. When you need to hire the first accountant, then it's another story. At the end, an accountant or an internal administrative person also costs a lot of money, and it's usually much more than the maybe 5,000 Swiss francs that people have in mind. Because if you calculate your full costs, this is much more. Sometimes it's even twice as much money.
There's a very good template that you created where you can actually check your full costs with everything included.
Right, yeah, we have download on our web page. You have social insurance costs, you have maybe 13 salary, you have bonuses, you need to have another desk, you have a computer that you need to buy. So it's a lot of money usually, and people are not that aware.
And maybe you can also walk us a bit through how you actually work with clients and run my accounts, because I think this is a very nice split up between digitizing the process, but also making sure that the human factor of checking the numbers, understanding them, and having accurate numbers is not coming too short. Can you walk us through how you actually work and collaborate with clients?
Yeah, there was a time where I believed, strongly believed, at the very beginning, basically that you could automate any aspect of accounting sooner or later. But while providing the service, I came to the conclusion that it probably will never be possible to do that. And I think the human factor is most important in that interface. So I think as the technology evolves, you have really fantastic machine learning algorithms, and you have more and more digital formats like electronic invoicing or bank data feeds where you can work with them, and you can save a lot of time potentially if you have the right process and the right technology. But still, sometimes a human needs to evaluate if, for example, something needs to be booked, or if something is a really an accounting document or not. And I think, for example, a machine cannot really decide what to do with this. So there needs to be a human that looks at the customer, looks at the business model of the customer, or the company, and decides if this has an importance or not. Mm-hmm. And also sometimes I think many entrepreneurs, if you just would give them their financial statements and say, do whatever you want with it, they might not really understand it, because there's a lot of interpretation. I think you need to, if you think about your finances of the company, it's quite complex. You have your competitors, you have your employees, your vendors, and so on, and somebody needs to, and I think it's a human, needs to see the complexity of the whole thing, and to analyze it, and then see also, while seeing that environment, he needs to see the financial statement and then get the right interpretation out of the numbers. Mm-hmm. And I think you need to be experienced to be able to really do that. And sometimes needs a consultant that helps the entrepreneur to understand or to take some important decisions. Mm-hmm. So and that therefore, we in Run My Accounts, we support our customers very personally. So there's a personal accountant for each client that also takes the responsibility of the whole accounting. Mm-hmm. And who is there and is personally responsible that everything is correct. And I think without this aspect, the whole automation thing just doesn't work. Yeah. And therefore, we do an initial kickoff with each client. So I think it's very important to understand the customer's business model, to consult him also. Should I go for VAT or not? Or how should I organize my accounts? How should I structure the chart of accounts and so on? And I think that's really an important factor just to set it up in a right way. Because if you just start, and then you have a whole lot of work invested, and then at some point you see the chart of account was wrong, or I didn't structure it well, or I forgot VAT or whatever. And usually to find the errors is even more time consuming than to do it right from scratch.
An important part there is also what accounting software should you use? What is your take on this choice?
Yeah, it also depends. I mean, also here I'm biased. We have our own accounting software, but I think in general, if you have a fiduciary and if you trust in him, I would guess that you let him choose, because he's the expert in accounting, and he's also the expert in the accounting software he uses. And I would suggest that you, if you don't understand anything of accounting or just a little bit, don't select the product and then select your fiduciary. I would say choose your fiduciary first and let him recommend a product that fits for your business model, for your size of the company, and so on. And there, in general, I mean, there are just there are accounting systems that where you book only the ledger, the general ledger, debit credit. And there are also systems with subledgers. For example, if you write invoices or you have accounts payables, then you have maybe subledgers. And subledgers are much more complex because normal ledger accounting is what you learn in school. But if you then use a subledger system, it's much more complex, and you need to have other concepts on how you do the bookkeeping, and I recommend therefore for small companies just use a normal ledger where you do debit credit bookings and don't use subledgers. Maybe if you're 7 or 8 employees, then it makes sense to get the higher complexity in, and because then at some point you have a benefit also if you write an invoice that it's already booked in and so on. But just at the beginning, if you want to have really cheap financial accounting, then go for a very easy solution like, for example, Banana or so. Because really, I think they're totally underestimated. It's really great to do bookkeeping like that.
And if you then approach this growth, and you are certainly approaching 7 or 8 employees, how expensive or tricky is it then to switch from a ledger to a subledger system? Is that like very time consuming, or is that something that can easily be done?
I think that can very easily be done. The advantage in accounting is that you always have a period, for example, a quarter or usually a financial year. And if you close the financial year, it doesn't make a difference if you just continue in your old system or if you go for a new system. Right. So, for example, many customers that come to run my accounts, they don't have to start on the 1st of January. We usually tell them to switch at the beginning of a new quarter, because then you have a VAT period included in one accounting system, and then starts the next VAT period in the new accounting system. And that's quite easy, so it's absolutely no problem to switch. But it's also, I would not recommend to import the old accounting data to the new system, because usually that's really tricky and depending a lot on the old system and the new system, the interfaces. So I would not recommend that. You can just close the books and then start from scratch.
And as the company grows, there are certain other aspects of financial planning and financial management also become more important. For example, financial reports that you then use also to make decisions for your company or strategy decisions. Can you also walk us through a couple examples on how you can make financial data-based decision-making in your company?
Yeah, so I think many companies, because they don't really have the know-how on accounting, they have like two systems. They have once they have their accounting. Maybe this accounting is just a database that is located at the fiduciary, and they have no access, and therefore they need to start like Excels where they do reportings. And for example, if they get an invoice, they plan or they enter the invoice into their Excel for liquidity planning, but then the same invoice later goes to the fiduciary, and then they have to key in the same figures again, and it's like a waste of time then, because you do the work twice, so it's not efficient. But also I think managing something like that in Excel is very dangerous, because if you work with an Excel sheet on and on, it might have an error in a formula, and you might get the wrong result. So I would say that if you grow to a certain extent and you need your reporting, you better go for a good accounting system where you get it out of the whole system. Also your planning figures and so on, then you don't need to do it twice. And therefore, then it's also very important to have a current account. So if you get an invoice, book it in immediately, because then you see also your impact on the liquidity and the future plans.
And that's why the system of subledgers is important to be able to get that done,
Absolutely,
right?
yeah. If you have the subledgers, you see in the near future.
And in the near future, one thing that is super important there is cash flow, or also liquidity planning.
Yeah.
Can you explain us why this is so important for companies?
Yeah, there are a lot of companies running out of cash, and then it's over. And basically, cash flow is so important. It's like the air that you breathe as a human. Cash flow is the air that a company breathes, and you need to have cash flow to survive. It doesn't depend where the cash flow is from, maybe from investors or from your customers, but you need to have cash flow, and it's very important to optimize it.
I remember back at university, the professor, he said, cash is king, but cash flow is King Kong.
I think he was right.
This is probably a good point to take away here. So how can you optimize the cash flow? How can you ensure that you are good liquidity-wise, that you are set up for a successful future and actually don't run out of money on your way there?
Yeah, I think that's quite, there's a lot of things you can do or think about it, but I think I wrote once an ebook that you can download on our webpage exactly about that subject. And I think there are about seven points that you can follow and which really help you to optimize your cash flow. And don't forget, so for example, just for a startup, if investors, if you look for investors, usually you do a cash flow, a DCF method valuation, and also there, the bigger the cash flow is, the more valuable the company is. And I think if you focus on the cash flow, it really helps. And there are some things that you can do to optimize it. Quite some are quick wins, other are more difficult to achieve. But for example, what you always also as a startup need to know is that growth really costs a lot of cash flow. So we see that also in Run My Accounts. If, for example, if we grow our customer base, we also need to grow our personnel. So because we are not that scalable, like for example just the software, because we also provide the services with humans, we also need to hire these humans. And so maybe half a year before we think that we get new customers, we need to hire new employees, find them. That costs some money on the market, because you need to do some advertising, and you have a hiring process that costs money. But then once the people start, they basically know almost nothing about your internal processes. So you need to educate them on the job. train them, and usually it takes about half a year until they really get productive.
That's a
And
long time.
it's a long time, yeah. But I think it's usually it's underestimated. So many new hires are not really that productive at the beginning, and it takes time. So if you hire people, or if you want to grow, you need to hire people, and then this costs you a lot of money. Maybe when then the new employee is finally productive, you need to wait another X month to be able to invoice and to that your customers then pay. So yeah, and sometimes you also choose the wrong personnel.
A very
That's
expensive mistake.
very expensive mistake. And also maybe if you grow, you need to rent a new office space, which costs more money, and you usually pay that money in advance before growth actually happens. So in many phases, I really underestimated the cost of growth in Run My Accounts, and I see this also with some customers.
I can imagine. Yeah, you see all of their books.
Yeah.
What other parts can you do to optimize your liquidity and cash flow?
So one very important thing is how the way how your customers pay you. So I think in this case the best business models would be prepaid business models. So where you get the money before you actually provide your service or sell your product. So the earlier your customer pays you, the less you need to go for a bank credit. That's very easy.
Right.
And so yeah, if prepaid would be an option in your business model, then you should absolutely go for that. If it's not possible, then I would suggest to set up payment terms, maybe for immediate payment, or maybe 10 days payment, or worst case would be 30 days of payment terms. Yeah, naturally, if you have a shop, a physical shop or a web shop, you get paid by credit card, so you get the money also quite early. But if you send invoices, it also takes some time until the invoice reaches your customer and until he pays. So if you can make that process more efficient, you might have more cash on your bank account. And also, I would suggest not to wait until too long to send reminders. So if a customer doesn't pay you, maybe you should call him and talk to him why he didn't pay, and really keep the process fluid. Send reminders and make sure that he really sticks to the contract and sends you the money. Because the longer that goes, the less probable it will be that he will pay. Yeah. Maybe he's also a cash flow problem, and the earlier you get your money, the safer you are.
And pricing can also be an important part here. In Silicon Valley, for example, they say if you double your price and you lose less than half of your customers, you earn more money in the end. How does that affect your liquidity and cash flow?
I think price rises are quite cash flow are important for your cash flow. For example, yeah, if you have if you're in a market where you maybe have you sell your product for 100 and you have costs of 80. So if you manage just to rise your prices let's say 10%, then you will sell your product for 110, and then your margin rises by 50%. So it's not 20 anymore, it's 30 absolute percent. So your margin rises by 50%. So that's a real leverage. And I think that's the example that you just mentioned. So if you manage to double prices, then your margin goes through the roof. But normally this is not possible, and maybe it's also something that you don't want. It depends on the market. Maybe if you're in a commodity market, you cannot rise the price at all. But if you're in a niche, it might be different.
But also what we hear often from, especially from Swiss startups, when we also talk to them, is that they most often undersell themselves and don't ask for enough money. Yeah. So they really leave money on the table and don't use the leverage that you just mentioned. So I think this is a very good recommendation to proactively think and reflect about its own pricing. Yeah. And maybe there's room for an increase.
Yeah, maybe.
You need to probably test it and find out with the customers. Yeah. Then you also, before you talked about having a shop, there you have inventory that you need to probably have in storage before your orders come in. What can you do to optimize if you have a physical product?
I think, that's difficult. So also if you, for example, provide a service where you do large projects that have to reach a certain step until you can invoice them, that's the same problem basically. And the little the smaller your stock is, the more cash is on your bank account, because you always need to buy the things that you sell first, and you pay them first, and afterwards you have them on stock, and then you need to sell them, but maybe some parts of your stock cannot be sold, maybe because it's outdated at some point, or it's not trendy enough anymore, or it's damaged, or whatever can happen. So the smaller your stock is, the better it is for your cash flow. But for sure, if you have a shop or you have this this stock, it's difficult to find ways out of it. Yeah. So, for example, I think there are business models even in the web. For web shops that are only have the shop, and the stock is managed somewhere totally else. So this is very beneficial for your cash flow.
But still, if you buy products that you then resell, or also whatever other goods you might sell, you usually have to pay your vendors at a certain point in time. Is there also room for optimization there?
Yeah, absolutely. The vendor payments, the sooner you pay your vendors, the less money you have on the bank account. It's the same there as well. I suggest to never pay an invoice too early. Yeah. So I'm a friend of paying on time. I don't suggest never pay them or something like that, or pay them much too late, but I just would recommend not to pay too early. And that sometimes happens as well.
Yeah. So actually, sort of the core message is actually simple. So make sure that you get paid as fast as possible, and that you pay your bills as late as possible.
Yeah.
That's the
it's
simple...
a bit egoistic, but that's how it works to optimize your cash flow.
Absolutely. And then if you have your cash flow under control, then, I mean, at a certain point in time, you probably have investors, depending if you choose to go down that path. And there I can imagine that, financial reportings become more important. They really want to see how you manage your finances and that everything is under control. How can a good financial system help you to sort of get that job done?
I think that's really there. You see then, if you have a good financial system, if an investor drops in and you are able to immediately show them accurate numbers, and also that the history, the track record is very important in that situation, that you have updated financials is probably one of the most important factors, besides a good product or a good service. Right. But in this moment where you have investors, then it's really important to show them that you have anything under control. And unfortunately, I've seen a lot of companies that failed in that phase. They had a good product, but they were not able, because they had just a too long history of not doing accounting. They lost their documents. They had no bank statements anymore because they lost them somewhere, and it's painful to clean it up, and takes a long time maybe, and maybe then your investors already said, oh, it's not the company that you want to buy.
It's also a lot about trust, right? In that regard, I can imagine.
I think so too. Yeah. You can signal that you have a company that works.
And basically, once you get money, so if the first part worked out, then I guess investors also want to see some control mechanisms to ensure that their money is spent wisely and that everything is under control. So what role does financial control play in that regard?
I think if you get money from an investor or a bank, you also have to consider a bank, your responsibility goes up because you get the money, you need to make sure that everything goes according to plan. I think in this phase, it's even more important to have your accounting under control and to be able to deliver reports as soon as possible. After the closing period, for example, monthly reports or quarterly reports. This helps the investor to get a good feeling what your company is doing. Maybe sometimes it's not going well, but also this is important, and then you're at least able to communicate. But if you're not able to do that, then things are getting difficult, I think.
Yeah. Would you also say that, companies that don't have their finances in order are more likely to fail?
I think so. That's true. I really made that experience. I think there's some correlation between a good, orderly, structured way how a company does accounting and the success at the end.
Right.
So I've seen that many times, unfortunately. So maybe many times with customers that decided too late to come to run my accounts, then we had no documents anymore, and we could not. It was just too late to support a fine process, and sometimes this it's hard to see something like that. Absolutely. If you have a good product and you just missed on financials, it's bad.
But I guess that's entrepreneurship. You have to balance several tasks at the same time.
That's true. That's so true.
So process-wise, it's also important to work with tools, with software. You already mentioned Banana as a good example. Yeah. What are other tools or like gadgets that you could recommend for the financial process?
For sure. I'm biased. Use Run My Accounts, I would say.
Of course.
So you don't have, you can focus on your business and not on your accounting. So what I really like as a tool is Zapier. We have connected Run My Accounts about 6 years ago to Zapier.com, and Zapier is like a very powerful platform where you can connect several web services together. For example, you can connect Run My Accounts with Google Sheets and track stuff there, or you can connect a CRM to your accounting system and do a lot of things and automate a lot of things. And I would recommend Zapier to any IT oriented startup to automate things. It really gives you a lot of possibilities and to actually save time. So that's a cool thing. But I think also it really depends on the industry. It depends on the size. It depends on the way how you want to work. So there are a lot of really good tools, but it always depends on how people work, and I can't do general recommendations.
Of course. And one last question from my side. This is a personal one, not strictly related to financial, but maybe it's also linked to it a certain way from your personal experience. Do you have any additional resources like books or blogs, podcasts that you can recommend that you consume yourself on a regular basis, maybe?
It's difficult to say. No, I don't, because what I do is I read a lot of books actually, and I also listen to a lot of books. For example, when I'm jogging, I'm a jogger. I listen to books, and this works quite well for me. And I really listen to a lot of different books. So my idea is I don't focus on one product. I want to see the whole range, and I try a lot. So I get inputs from very different channels. Right. And yeah, I'm quite using different things, so to get the broadest perspective that you can get.
Perfect. So a wild or a wide red man, sort of to say. Is there anything that we have not talked about yet that you would like to add to this conversation?
No.
Okay. Then thank you so much for your time, Thomas. It's been a pleasure talking to you, and I wish you lots of success with Run My Accounts. And I'm curious to see what other projects that you might start in the future. Who knows?
Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much for listening to today's episode. If you enjoyed the content, we would be thrilled to receive your rating on Apple Podcasts. That way you not only support Swisspreneur, but also help other entrepreneurs discovering the show and finding more valuable information on how to run their businesses. Next week, we will already be back with an all new episode of the Swisspreneur Show, so we hope to see you again then for a new episode.